The first thing I heard was the echo. A cavernous hush, broken only by the slow toll of the cathedral bell. It rolled through the vaulted ceiling and sank into my bones like a warning. I stood in the narrow hallway behind the altar, the air heavy with incense and roses, my hands clenched around a bouquet that suddenly felt like a weapon. Through the cracked doorway, I could see the sanctuary bathed in jewel-toned light from the stained glass windows. Guests filled every pew, their murmurs a low, expectant hum. On the far side of the aisle, my father waited, straight-backed, dignified, ready to escort his only daughter into a new life. Only the life they were expecting me to walk into was already dead. I wasn't nervous. Nerves are for people uncertain about what comes next. I knew exactly what would happen the moment I stepped out there. My pulse wasn't quick from fear. It was the steady drumbeat of resolve. Somewhere in the front row, my mother would be poised in her emerald dress, every strand of hair in place, her face composed into the perfect blend of maternal pride and theatrical emotion. She would look like the picture of grace. But I had seen what lay beneath the paint and powder. I had read it in her own careful handwriting. And at the altar, Nathaniel would be waiting, handsome, immaculate, wearing the expression of a man who believes the world bends to his will. He'd meet my eyes with that same practiced warmth he'd used to win over my parents, my friends, my entire life. 3 years ago, I would have melted beneath it. Today I would cut it to pieces. The music shifted, soft strings, the opening notes of the processional. Kathleen, my maid of honor, squeezed my arm. "It's time," she whispered. I forced a smile, the kind you give before a performance, when the lights are about to come up, and you know there's no curtain call. One step forward and I'd be in full view. One step forward and the entire carefully spun web would collapse. I could almost feel it. The weight of their secrets pressing against the air, straining to stay hidden. They didn't know yet that I'd found them out. They thought the stage was set for their triumph. I adjusted the bouquet, straightened my shoulders and breathed in the scent of roses, rich and cloying. It was the scent of a funeral. A hush fell across the cathedral. All eyes turned toward the entrance. And then I stepped into the light. The gasp wasn't audible, but I could sense it ripple through the crowd, something in the way I carried myself, maybe something in my eyes. By the time I reached the altar, they would all understand. They would know that this was not a wedding. It was an execution. 3 months earlier, I would have sworn my life was charmed. I was 28, the daughter of a respected pastor and a woman who could run a charity gala with one hand and rearrange the seating chart with the other. I'd climbed my way to senior editor at one of the most competitive publishing houses in D.C. I had friends who envied my job, my apartment, my engagement. And Nathaniel Reed, well, he was the kind of man who could make strangers trust him in minutes. 31, corporate attorney, son of a judge and a philanthropist. His BMW was always polished, his tie always straight, his smile never late. When he proposed at the Kennedy Center during intermission of Swan Lake, it felt like a scene written just for me. Cameras flashed, champagne appeared, my mother dabbed her eyes. "It's perfect," she said afterward, turning my hand to admire the diamond. "You've done well, sweetheart." I thought she meant I'd chosen a man who loved me. I didn't notice the way she didn't mention happiness, only the transaction. My father was more earnest. "Nathaniel's a good man," he told me, arms warm around my shoulders. "And you love him. That matters most." At the time I believed him. Love had always been the compass in my family's world. I didn't know yet that compasses can be deliberately broken. The wedding planning came like a tidal wave. Flowers, music, fittings, tastings. My mother took the lead with the precision of a general. I let her, grateful to be spared the constant logistics, though I noticed she had an uncanny way of bending every detail toward her vision, not mine. She and Nathaniel seemed to enjoy each other's company more than most future in-laws. He'd linger in the kitchen long after I'd stepped away to take calls, their laughter drifting through the house like a duet. Sometimes he brought wine that just happened to be her favorite. Sometimes she wore dresses I'd never seen her choose for church. Once, walking through Meridian Park, I teased him about how well he'd learned her tastes. He smiled without missing a step. "Your mother's remarkable," he said, squeezing my hand. "It's obvious where you get it from." I told myself it was flattery. I told myself a lot of things. Still, something in me was storing these observations, tucking them away like a meticulous editor marking typos in a manuscript. I didn't yet know what the story was, but I knew enough to watch for the next page. The first crack came weeks later, subtle enough to dismiss. But even then I felt it like the faint shift of a building before it falls. And when it fell, it wouldn't just bring down my wedding. It would bring down the people who thought they could write my life for me. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of gray DC evening that makes the streetlights flicker on too early. I'd stopped by my parents' house after work, arms full of RSVP cards in my laptop bag. We'd planned to finalize the seating chart over dinner, and I expected the familiar smell of my mother's vanilla candles and baked salmon drifting from the kitchen. Instead, the air was thick with something sharper, expensive cologne, the kind that clings to skin and fabric for hours. "Mom," called, setting my things down in the foyer. Her voice floated from the kitchen, bright but a touch too quick. "Sweetheart, you're early." "It's 6:30, I said as I rounded the corner. "Same time I always." She stood at the sink, hair slightly mussed, sleeves pushed up, scrubbing plates that were already spotless. Her cheeks were flushed as though she'd been running. Or hiding. "Your father's at a board meeting," she said, still turned toward the sink. "Just me tonight." I slid onto a stool at the island, pretending not to notice the coffee mug on the counter, the delicate china set we only used for important guests. Steam curled from it. "You drinking coffee this late?" I asked. She hesitated, then reached for a dish towel. "Needed the caffeine. Long day." It wasn't just the words. It was the way she avoided my eyes, the faint tremor in her voice. My mother had many talents, but lying convincingly wasn't one of them. I wanted to press. Instead, I opened the first RSVP card and began marking the chart. "Let's start with the reads," I said, my tone deliberately light. Her relief was almost palpable. We worked side by side for the next hour, but she kept glancing at her phone, fingers tapping the counter between texts. At one point she smiled small private and then caught me watching. "Work message," she said too quickly. Later that night, Nathaniel texted to say he'd be working late. I noticed the way my mother's posture loosened as she poured herself another glass of wine. I pretended not to notice. But in the quiet drive back to my apartment, I replayed the evening in my head, slotting it into the mental file of oddities I'd been keeping since the engagement. The cologne, the coffee mug, the tension, the almost smile at a message she wouldn't explain. Individually, they were nothing. Together, they were a draft of a story that didn't match the one I'd been told. I didn't know yet that the next crack would open wide enough to see through. And once I looked, I wouldn't be able to unsee anything. The second crack came a week later, and it was big enough to hear. Nathaniel had canceled dinner twice that week, claiming he was swamped at the firm. He'd missed the cake tasting entirely, which was strange. He'd been the one most excited about triple-tier options and buttercream frostings. That Thursday, I called his office after lunch, wanting to surprise him with takeout. His secretary's voice was polite, but her words sliced clean. "Oh, Mr. Reed left early today." The lie wasn't mine this time. By the time I parked in front of his sleek Georgetown high-rise, dusk had settled over the Potomac. The doorman greeted me by name and waved me toward the elevator, oblivious to the cold not forming in my chest. On the 15th floor I knocked. Waited. Knocked again. No answer. "Nathaniel." My voice sounded too loud in the quiet hallway. I slipped my key into the lock. The apartment was dim, shades drawn, the kind of hush that feels staged. His car was in the garage, so he was here. The living room looked untouched, except for a single wine glass on the coffee table. It wasn't mine, and the lipstick print on its rim was a deep, unfamiliar crimson. I stared at it a beat too long. "Nathaniel." From behind his bedroom door came the muffled reply. "I'm here. Not feeling well. Food poisoning." Relief didn't come. Not even pretend relief. "Let me take care of you," I said, already stepping toward the door. "No. Don't want you catching anything. I'll call you tomorrow." His voice was strained, not in pain but in caution. The kind people use when they're navigating a minefield. I pressed my palm against the door. "You sure?" "Love you," he added, a fraction too late. I stood there for another moment, absorbing the locked door, the wine glass, the perfume I now recognized. Not mine, not random, and disturbingly close to the scent that had hung in my parents' kitchen a week before. My reflection in the darkened hallway mirror caught me off guard. I didn't look like a fiancé checking on her sick partner. I looked like a detective who just marked a suspect. When I finally left, the elevator ride felt longer than the climb up. My phone buzzed with a text from him before I'd even reached the lobby. "Sorry. I'll make it up to you tomorrow." I didn't reply. Some part of me wanted desperately to believe his excuses. Another part, quiet, coiled, deliberate, was already taking notes. I didn't know it yet, but I was only 2 days from finding the kind of evidence no one could explain away. And when I found it, I wouldn't be asking questions anymore. I'd be planning the end. 2 days before the wedding, my phone lit up with my mother's name. "Celeste, darling, I need a favor," she said, the words flowing with that effortless command she'd perfected. I left the wedding programs in my car. They're in a manila envelope on the passenger seat. Could you swing by and grab them? I'm meeting Mrs. Chin for lunch. It was an easy errand. 20 minutes later, I was pulling up behind her silver Mercedes, the sun glinting off its immaculate paint. The car was unlocked, of course it was. We lived in a neighborhood where people still left keys under doormats. I opened the passenger door, spotted the envelope immediately, and reached for it. That's when I saw it. A small black leather notebook wedged between the seat and the console. My name, written on the cover in my mother's looping script. For a moment I hesitated. Could have been a keepsake.
À surprise.
Something harmless. I opened it anyway. The first entry was dated 3 months earlier, right after the engagement party. Nathaniel Reed is everything I should have married. Handsome, successful, from the right family. I settled for William and his modest life, but maybe it's not too late. Maybe I deserve something beautiful again. The words swam. I flipped the page. He stayed after Celeste left today. We talked for hours. He says I'm wasted here. He's right. God help me, when he kissed me, I kissed him back. Entry after entry, the pages blurred into one long confession. The late-night visits, the wine, the hotel rooms, the promises to find a way after the wedding. My mother's precise handwriting documented it all with surgical detail. The last entry was dated yesterday. Tomorrow night, while William is at his meeting, Nathaniel will come over. Our last time before the ceremony. After that, we'll have to be careful. But we've come too far to stop now. My hands were trembling, but my thoughts were ice cold. This wasn't a fling. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a campaign, a deliberate, calculated theft of my future. I sat there in the driver's seat, hearing the distant sound of children playing, sprinklers ticking, the everyday life of a neighborhood that had no idea its pastor's wife and his daughter's groom were lovers. The old version of me, the one who believed in salvaging things, would have confronted them in private, demanded an explanation, begged for some remnant of the truth. But that version of me had died between these leather covers. I slipped the notebook into my bag and closed the car door gently, almost reverently, as if sealing a vault. I wasn't going to salvage anything. I was going to burn the whole structure down while the congregation was watching. The morning of my wedding was sharp and clear. The kind of day weather forecasters call perfect. I woke in a hotel suite, not the bridal room my mother had arranged. Steam curled from my coffee cup as I watched the city wake from the wide window. 6 hours until the ceremony. 6 hours until their stage became mine. My phone buzzed with messages from Diana, lavish, sugary updates about flowers, music, and how she couldn't wait to see me. I read each one like they were lines from a villain's script. At St. Michael's Cathedral, the side entrance led to the bridal room. My dress hung on the rack. A cathedral train gown my mother had insisted upon, all lace and beadwork. A monument to tradition. My bridesmaids fussed over me, oblivious. Kathleen, my maid of honor, told me I looked radiant. I told her she was about to see something unforgettable. When my father arrived, I took his hands. "Before we walk, you need to see this." The journal fell open in his grip. His face drained of color as he read. By the time he reached the last page, his hands were trembling. "Celeste, it's real. Every word." His voice cracked. "What do you want to do?" We walked down that aisle. And we tell the truth. Minutes later, the cathedral doors swung wide. 200 people rose to their feet. Cameras flashed. Nathaniel's smile was dazzling. My mother's eyes shimmered with fake emotion. We reached the altar. My father placed my hand in Nathaniel's, but there was steel in his gaze as he stepped back. Pastor Jenkins began the ceremony. I let him speak, let the room breathe in the illusion one last time. When he asked if anyone had cause to object, I stayed silent. I waited until the vows, when he asked if I would take Nathaniel, forsaking all others. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the vaulted space, I have something to say. The string quartet faltered into silence. Every face turned toward me. Nathaniel's grip tightened. Celeste? I pulled my hand free and faced the congregation. Yesterday, I discovered that my fiancé and my mother have been having an affair. I found her journal. Every detail. Every lie. Every betrayal. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My father stood, voice booming. Sit down, Diana. I went on, each sentence a blow. Nathaniel's nights at my parents' house, the gifts, the promises to be together after the wedding. I gave them dates, places, facts no one could refute. Nathaniel stammered for an explanation. My mother's tears were raw, messy, but no one looked at me with pity. This isn't revenge, I finished. It's truth. And I choose myself over both of them. I turned, my train sweeping behind me like the cloak of an executioner, and walked out into the October air. For the first time in months I could breathe. By the time I reached the parking lot, the cathedral behind me was erupting in chaos. Voices raised, chairs scraping, the low thud of a door slammed too hard. My phone buzzed with calls and texts, but I ignored them all until one came through from Priya. Got it all, she said, breathless. Every word, every face. You're going viral by dinner. Good, I replied. And I meant it. Within hours the footage was everywhere. On Facebook, Twitter, even local news sites under headlines about the altar revelation. Nathaniel's firm announced his indefinite leave by the end of the day. My mother's social circle, once her fortress, collapsed. Invitations vanished. Her charity board positions disappeared without ceremony. At home, my father met me with an embrace that felt like armor. You did the right thing, he said. 3 weeks later, he filed for divorce. He resigned from the pulpit soon after, choosing integrity over the illusion of a perfect marriage. Diana moved in with her sister in Baltimore. Nathaniel vanished from public view. I never answered their messages. There are some wounds you don't stitch back together. You let them scar. I sold my apartment, took a new position in New York, and for the first time in my adult life, lived somewhere no one knew my history. I filled my home with books and wildflowers, the ones I'd wanted for my bouquet. The video's viral peak faded within a month, but the messages kept coming. Women from all over sent their stories. Some whispered from bathrooms, others typed late at night beside sleeping partners they no longer trusted. They didn't just see my choice, they saw a possibility for their own. 6 months later, I stood behind a podium at the National Women's Literature Conference. My keynote wasn't about betrayal. It was about the moment you decide your dignity is worth more than someone else's comfort. We're told to keep the peace, I said, looking out at rows of intent faces. We're told that silence is grace, and that other people's happiness matters more than our truth. But when you choose yourself, when you refuse to be a silent accomplice to your own humiliation, you're not just changing your life. You're giving others permission to do the same. The applause felt different from the standing ovations I'd received at work or book launches. This wasn't polite approval, it was recognition. A quiet, collective understanding. Afterward, a young woman with tear-bright eyes stopped me in the lobby. I saw your video, she said. It gave me the courage to leave someone who'd been lying to me for years. I just wanted to say, thank you. That night, I sat in my hotel room with a glass of wine, looking out over the New York skyline. Somewhere, my mother and Nathaniel might still be telling themselves stories where they were the victims. But that was no longer my concern. My story was mine again. And I'd written the ending myself.